Good morning and welcome to Better Thyself segment of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. What's better? What is right? Necessarily means who is differentiation between who is right and what is right. And what would be your preference? Do you want to be the right person? Or do you want to do what is right and correct? Now, the idea of disagreement on issues, governance, philosophy, or life itself is not something new. Difference of ideas can always be there. Our history books, our scriptures are full of the stories of the individuals and societies who are going against the prescribed authority of the time. And they suffered. And definitely they suffered because they were, according to them, doing what was right. But the authorities have always thought that they are right. So who is right? What is really acceptable? The question of a person being right, or the question of an ideology being correct and justified? Is rebellion right? What is public good? It's a very, very dicey and complex question, but that's extremely important. Mathematics is perhaps the purest form of logic we can relate to. Absolutely, there's no emotion involved in mathematics. 2 and 2 would make 4. Simple. But does this logic work for more tricky or sensitive issues? The issues involving conscience, the issues involving choice, the issues involving selection. Who gets to decide who is right and what is right? Interestingly, there's a very interesting comment by Singh Jaspal. He says a powerful nation, a person will always take who is right as better. Absolutely correct. But then the question arises, if that is really right, I'm not concerned with the individual concept, but then societal and ethical aspects have to be considered. Was Hitler right? Was killing of 6 million Jews correct? Was partition of India right? So these are the questions which relate to that. Or for that matter, was the salt march, Dandi march of Mahatma Gandhi right? So before we decide who is right is preferable or what is right is preferable, we have to define what is dissent. After the question of right and wrong would always give rise to the question of dissent. But what seems to be the new word, dissent, is now assumed a lot of connotations. It's popping up everywhere, on mobile, on computer screens when you surf the internet for news. Even more if that space happens to be the social media. According to the Cambridge University, dissent would mean disagree with other people about something. And it's become a buzzword of sorts, and it would not surprise me if it ends up with becoming the word of the year. Now, one group dissenting with the decision of others, the left wing dissenting with the ideas of the right wing, all this makes one ponder who is correct. When Guru Nanak went to Hardwar and started throwing water towards the west, was he right? Because according to the authoritative sources, he was not doing correct. But his logic was right. And people could not declaim that. Was Galileo right when he said that the earth moves from the sun? Now that was a dissent and violative of what the church thought to be right. But was it really right? So who is right? And what is right is a perennial question that faces us. As an individual, our spirit, our consciousness is important to us. And we observe the phenomena of the world around us with all our sensory perceptions. We gather informations, finally try to make sense of this information using the mind and intelligence which in turn relies on the present and the past experience and what we have been taught. From the sound of it, this system of knowledge gathering seems pretty much satisfactory, where an individual is in control of what he wishes to know, how the authentication process is carried on, how the information is processed, and what he does with it. But there is one glitch, and that cannot be ignored. We have not factored in the ability or the inability of our senses to acquire factual knowledge. And there are four major drawbacks in that. If you go to the Vedic scriptures, they talk extensively about this problem and broadly classify these defects associated with our senses. We want to be deluded, or we are deluded, Brahm. We commit mistakes, we have tendency to cheat, and most importantly, the imperfection of the senses. Now, sitting through an hour-long lecture and not remembering anything, seeing a mirage of water on the highway, mistaking a rope for snake, and not being able to see the subjects too far or too near. All these are manifestations of varying degree of the sensory defects. And here, you are seeing a mirage. So for you, it's right. But is mirage really there? What is right is that the sun refraction is causing you to be deluded, and you imagine water which is not there. You are in a desert, you are dreaming of water, you are thinking of water, and the sand shining transmutes itself into a mirage. But does it become water? It doesn't. The logical thing to do is what is right is more important, not who is right. Persons, societies, authorities, they are not the deciding factors. The ethical aspects of any factor are much more important. As Singh Jaspal's comment revealed, that at one time or during their duration, what Hitler and Mussolini did was right according to them. And millions of people accepted that at that time and continue to accept it today. But that was not right because that was violative of other things. Now, as I said, logically, mathematics can decide for those situations where individual psyche is not involved. But where the psychology, the mind of an individual is involved, then the decision of what is right has to go by certain parameters. Those parameters again can differ. In one society, it's important for a girl to be virgin. In some tribes of India, it's important for the girl to become pregnant before marriage to show that she is fertile. So who is right? That's a major question. Second question is what is right? It is up to the girl to decide whether she wants to become pregnant or not. So the individual choice becomes much more important. But again, there is a caveat. The individual choice cannot be the only factor. Human beings are social animals. The social constraints would always be there. So the higher ethical values would have to come in being. And again, ethics, the concept would differ from, as I said just now, from place to place, from time to time. What was ethical at one time is no longer ethical today. It is very ethical to go by the caste division, not today. It was very well to accept that the women commit suicide when the husband died, the sati. It's not possible today, and it's not acceptable today. So even the ethics change, the morality changes. But some factors would remain the same. Thou shalt not cheat, thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not be envious, and things like that. So what is right when a majority of a given society thinks of something that does not become right? The individual conscious, individual thought, individual perception has to be given its due, and then you have to weigh whether you are an animal, whether you are a sheep or a mindless ant, or whether you are a human being. The factor deciding whether you are a human being and a real intelligent human being is that you think for yourself. Simply because your parents, your teachers, your religious scriptures have told you to do something does not mean that that is acceptable. Now, according to the majority of the people, what your parents tell you or what your teachers tell you or what your gurus have told you is right. You can't challenge it. No. You have got to decide it was possibly right when they did it. The situational change has been there. So logical thing for you to do would be, should you look for knowledge that is free from that thought to be deluded, committing mistakes, tendency to cheat, or imperfection of the senses? There is a Sanskrit word for it, uparshiva. It translates not of human origin. Anything with a defect cannot produce a perfect object. And every human being has some defect or the other. So a wrong start to a mathematical problem cannot produce a correct solution. Simply because who is the person, the top dog decides do this, cannot be right. And it is for this simple reason that the sages of antiquity realize the soul and advise us to look forward to our mind, to our soul, to our spirit, to our consciousness and guidance. And that's what they say, be authentic. If you want to be a thief, be a thief. But does your conscience permit you to do that? Or does it trouble you? If it troubles you, then it's not right. If it doesn't trouble you, it's perfectly right. After all, it's not so important as to who is right as compared to what is right. What is right is the guiding principle. Who is right is okay for mindless ants and animals, sheep, lemmings. They'll commit suicide once the leader starts committing suicide. But not normal human beings. So you have got to see. When we think of who is right, we have to decide who is that who. Is it simply because that person is in a place of authority? Then it might make good politics to accept it. But it may not be consciously or humanly acceptable. On the other hand, what is right is eternal and permanent. It's not subject to individual whims. So if you want to be a better human being, you have got to decide and take recourse to not carry out the orders, because who is not important? What is important? And then that is coupled with why. Who gives an order? You have to see why. Is it relevant, important, authentic? Your mind tells you something, again you have to go by why. So who and what, when they are tested at the scale of why, then you would decide what to do. Quite possible. At many times, who is right and what is right would be the same. There will be an identity in them. Nevertheless, still there would be a difference. In normal discourse of life, in normal living, what is right would always be preferable to who is right. As I said, what is right determines that you have the ability to differentiate between right and wrong, between correct and incorrect, between being a human being, a person capable of thought pattern, and an animal, mindless ants, lemmings, sheep, rats. Follower leader is not a part of the human capability. So if you really want to be a better human being, if you really want to be authentic, if you really want to be what Shakespeare would say, the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say, he is a man. So if you want to be that man, then what is more important is always a better option than who is right. What is right would always supersede who is right. And if you say who is right, without thinking diverse aspects, then of course you cannot be a better human being. So enable yourself by being able to differentiate the reality of the situation, not by the person, but by the values of things. And that value should be the deciding factor. Thank you.